Okay, welcome to Sparring Sessions, a podcast that is part of the MMA Today podcast network. I am John Franklin in one corner. I'm joined by co-founder and editor-in-chief of MMA Today, Tony Fagnano, in the other corner. We are sparring about the great discussion that has gone on forever about Bellator and UFC. Once a huge Grand Canyon-sized gap between them. Is the gap closing? And also, what are some of the interesting things Bellator is doing to make themselves more relevant? All right, Tony, let's talk Bellator. It was announced this week they are going to do a welterweight Grand Prix. This is obviously awesome news for the promotion. The heavyweight Grand Prix is going amazingly. But it opened up an interesting discussion, which you had on Twitter, and it was retweeted by a couple other guys, and you had your thoughts on it, about who would win between UFC and Bellator champions. Conventional wisdom or public wisdom, the wisdom of crowds, if you will, probably says that all UFC fighters would just sweep them right out because, UFC's better, right, Tony?
Obviously, I disagree there. I put out, some matchups that I thought would be competitive. Just looking at, the champions in each weight class. There's obviously some that are wouldn't be competitive at all. I can freely admit that. But, going down probably from most competitive at least to least competitive, I think, at least with the current champ, we're talking about just current champs in each division. You have, McFarlane, who is about to fight actually this Friday, the flyweight champion, and the current flyweight champion in UFC is Montano. I think that's a very competitive fight. Gegard Mousasi, of course, left the UFC on the kind of a weird, what did it wind up being, a no contest versus Weidman?
Yeah.
Obviously had a winning streak before that. Him versus Whitaker, very competitive. McDonald, Rory Woodley too. I mean, if you don't remember how that first one went, pull that up on Fight Pass. Woodley was just dominated. And then you also have a couple fights that are up in the air right now because TJ Dillashaw and Cody Garbrandt are about to fight. I think Caldwell, would be a sizable underdog versus either of those guys, but it would still be a compelling matchup. And then you have the younger Pitbull, I believe, facing off versus Holloway or the Ortega winner, which I think that would be a very fun and competitive fight.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the Bellator is not what it used to be. It's not the graveyard for UFC fighters that it once was. I think that guys are going there for the guy that I thought that really swung it was Benson Henderson. He seemed like he was towards the end of his career, but he still seemed like he had a little bit more to give. The UFC wasn't offering necessarily what he wanted, but he probably could have made a case to stay. He was, I don't know, maybe he was more like a traditional Bellator guy than I'm thinking. McDonald for sure.
I thought it was Rory.
Yeah, I think McDonald left his prime for sure.
I thought it was Rory.
Yeah. I would say that. So do you think now guys really look at Bellator as what is if you and I can make this compelling case, or you made it, I'm sort of agreeing with it about these competitive matchups. What is it about the public or what keeps the UFC that far out ahead of everybody else? If we can look plainly here at these matchups that are Bellator guys would win.
Well, I think a lot of the fault, it kind of rests on Bellator that people have this, idea that the UFC is just so much, farther ahead. When you put on these, and I understand why they put on these fights, like why Chael Sonnen and Rampage are headlining over Rory and Douglas Lima. They're appealing to the older fan base, the Pride fan base, the more casual fans. I get it, but it also hurts just the credibility when you're not promoting your champions like you are these I don't even know how to label them, legend fights, I guess.
Yeah.
And I feel like they're really shooting themselves in the foot. If Darian Caldwell is being promoted like Cody Garbrandt, I don't think you would be seeing statements like UFC champions would completely mop the floor. Like every UFC champion would mop the floor with with Bellator champions, and there was some very odd logic in some of the replies I was getting, like, well, it's already been proven that no Bellator fighter could ever, beat a UFC champion. And I'm like, Eddie Alvarez went over the UFC and knocked out Rafael dos Anjos, so it has been proven. Like, we already saw this. Like, it's the other way around. I don't understand.
Yeah, no, you're right. When guys come from other promotions, obviously Rockhold's held a belt, Woodley's held a belt. Guys coming from other promotions have been successful. A lot of Pride guys came over and held belts. Rampage, Shogun. So I guess what's the answer for Bellator? I mean, does that mean is the answer bringing UFC guys in and then having them I know you're about as fond of the crossover between wrestling and MMA as I am, but I'll use this word just because it fits. Do you need UFC guys to put the Bellator guys over, or is that not the secret? Like, you bring a guy like Machida in, obviously the top of the division in the Bellator and the two divisions that Machida fights in are both former UFC guys anyway, so that doesn't work. What's the secret, do you think?
I don't think it's hard because even when a guy like when Musasi went over and fought Shlemenko, or not a better example, Lorenz Larkin, top 10 ranked UFC fighter, goes over. I think he lost twice or three times.
Right.
And people are like, well, UFC just knew when to let him go, UFC, like, they already knew he was trending downwards, and it's like the guy was like in his 20s, on a winning streak. Like, what do you mean the UFC like telepathically knew that? No, like, there's more competition out there, and Lorenz Larkin, I don't know if he, took these guys for granted because they were in Bellator or whatever, but he's lost, and it had nothing to do with the fact that there's some kind of voodoo around UFC leaving when they let fighters go. I don't know what the secret is. I mean, the only way that the Strikeforce guys got any respect is when they merged with the UFC.
Right.
Obviously there are tons of Strikeforce guys eventually became champions: Rousey, Cyborg, Lawler, Henderson, Rockhold, DC, who we just talked about, Woodley. I mean, those are all Strikeforce fighters. So I guess this is going to sound crazy, but the only solution is to have the two promotions merge.
Yeah. Well, I guess the other question is, do you, and I've been saying this for a long time, and I understand the financial logistics of not doing this, and I get why you wouldn't do this if you're a promotion, but does it make sense to just do a card? If you're doing them every month, you do them every other month and stack them. I mean, obviously you're always at the mercy of injuries, right? But I mean, if you were to do, in 12 months, you did 6 cards or 8 cards, I know why that doesn't keep your fighters busy. I know all the reasons not to do it. But my question is does that make it? I mean, it's hard because you look and you say, okay, like you said, Strikeforce, WEC, they got good enough to just get absorbed to the UFC or purchased to the UFC. Same thing kind of with Pride. I mean, Pride had kind of run their course. I mean, they were competitive with the UFC, but they were competitive with the UFC at a time when the UFC was down. It's not like if they existed today, they might be Bellator if they existed today, even with the same roster. Who knows? So, do you think less cards, stacked cards, are? Do you think that it's on these fighters? They have to be more social media involved. Do you think it's on the PR of Bellator? Like, who's got blood on their hands here?
Pretty much everyone you named. I mean, and to throw in even more, the fact that these are tape delayed, absolutely kills a lot of momentum for anybody on the West Coast. I don't have this problem because I stream digitally, but for anybody that has standard satellite cable and is trying to watch this on Spike, well, it's not Spike anymore, but now Paramount, they have to watch a live fight tape delayed, and that's not happening in 2018 with Twitter and everything. It's a big sticking point. There's a press conference this coming tomorrow, so maybe by the time this comes out, this will actually be resolved. But I know that a high-ranking Viacom, executive will be there, and it's apparently to discuss something about streaming. So hopefully that will no longer be an issue. I know another issue is our friends across the pond in the UK can't even see these fights sometimes. That they'll be delayed up. I'm complaining about a 3-hour delay from East to West Coast. Our British friends, sometimes they have to wait a week to watch these cards.
Yeah.
So that's definitely hurting. But like you said, I don't think their fighters are as active on social media as a whole. There's some exceptions there. I don't think they do. The promotion could definitely be better. The spread out, or sorry, the saturated cards, where they're kind of doing one. It seems like they're doing them too often, basically, and they'll go to places like Budapest, and it's just like, why, and the card is extremely thin. The ratings are very low. Like, there's just, it would make a lot more. Your suggestion would make a lot more sense to do less events and do more like what we're going to see in San Jose, where, I mean, you just look up and down. You got the legend fight and Wanderlei Rampage, but then you also have this super fight where the welterweight champion Rory is moving up to take on Musasi. You have the beginning of the welterweight Grand Prix with MVP and Paul Daly finally fighting, as well as Douglas Lima and Andrei Koreshkov, who is one of the most underrated fighters around. A Russian who trains with Shlemenko and some other really badass guys over in Russia, fighting for the third time. So, I mean, just when you have that, and then you go from that to an event headlined by, frankly, guys you have to Google,
Yeah.
it's tough. It's not. It's basically like it's like the UFC going from a stacked event like UFC 226 to a UFC Singapore, but every other month they're doing it. It would just get old after a while, and it loses momentum. You lose momentum.
Right, and I just want to say this quickly. If anybody in the Bellator, higher ups or whatever hear this, I want to be very clear about something. There's a reason why we've transitioned this discussion to what we started with and what we're at now, and it's because I don't disagree with what you said about the matchups. So our point more, powers that be at Bellator, is not that your roster is good. You have a good roster, and you've made some really good, bringing in Musasi, bringing in McDonald. These are all smart moves you've made. I think bringing in Machida is a good move. You have a good roster. So our question is, then if you have a good roster, what's with the gap? We're trying to figure out what's with the gap. Not that you are like fucking everything up and you're never going to catch the UFC and it's all, you're the Titanic and you got the guys are playing music still. I don't think that at all. I think you have a great roster. So the question becomes, why still the gap? It might be a societal thing. It might be as simple as if Dana White ran Bellator, would it be different? Dana White tomorrow ran Bellator and Scott Coker ran UFC. Would their trajectories change? So I have two questions for you to get you out of here, Tony, and those are this. Do you think that there's a little bit of a thing with Bellator, and I'll go across the board, fighters, media, all the way across the board, that when you're dealing with Bellator, you don't give it your best because it's Bellator, and then everybody measures themselves based on the UFC? So if I'm covering a Bellator event, would I cover a Bellator event in the same way that I would cover a UFC event? I would like to think so, but is that the case? If I'm fighting in a Bellator event, am I fighting in a Bellator event the same way I'd fight in a UFC event? I'd like to think so, but is that the case? I don't know. Is it a little bit like a systemic thing? Is it you follow me?
Yeah, no, I there's something about, and it's no fault of theirs, because there's definitely something about. I mean, I can only speak for myself personally, as far as the media goes. When I go to a Bellator event, as many opportunities are presented to me, I'm doing just as much, as I can. But the fact that I think the UFC makes their fighters a little bit more available post fight, and it's much more clear, when when those interview opportunities are as well. So, having covered both events or both promotions, sorry, um, it can be a little, unless they're doing the post fight press conferences, which I actually think are very well done by Bellator. Then it can be a little, if you're doing like a smaller Bellator show, and I know our friend Nolan can attest to this, it's a little tough because the prelim guys, you're not sure really who's available. You're kind of just like, hey, is this guy going to be there? Like, has he gone to the hospital? Is he around? Has he already left the building? And then, you know, they won't even do a post-fight press conference. It'll just be like scrums.
Right.
And it, a lot of sometimes fighters just won't be available. But I guess that's true for both promotions. Like I said, I can only speak for myself. I'm not half-assing it when I go to a Bellator card. I'm just using, what they're giving me basically. And sometimes, it won't be as much on one side. Fighters, I don't think that they, at least the ones who have the right mindset, are not approaching, these fights like half-heartedly, because Michael Chandler, that guy always giving it. Go watch the Rory Lima fight. Afterwards, Rory was like, that is the toughest fight I have ever had in my life, and that was in Bellator. And you could tell because they had to carry Rory out of the arena because his leg was so messed up. So I definitely don't think the fighters are taking it half, at least the ones who are going to be successful. Because if you're taking these fights half-heartedly, as a professional fighter, that's not a good sign.
That's true. All right, I'll get you out of here on this one. Chael Sonnen came out on his I guess his podcast or his social media recently and said that there's a handful of guys who really understand the business, and he's one of them. And it's Dana and these guys that really know what the hell's going on. Do you think that if Chael Sonnen was the face of Bellator, things would be different?
Oh,
if he had a Dana White,
I like that
position.
Yeah. Well, they would definitely be different. If you're talking about him,
could he close the gap?
Being the president?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That would be a little scary. I don't really think he understands the fight business as well as he probably thinks he does. I don't think he could step in and fill Scott Coker's shoes. I don't think Scott Coker gets enough credit for what he's done in Strikeforce and now Bellator. Amazing job. Definitely, Dana White is going to be the guy everybody points to, but Scott Coker has done more with a lot less, basically. And I don't think Chael could handle a lot of that back end type of things that you don't see at a press conference. At a press conference or dealing with the media, Chael would be pure gold. Like that would be, he would probably blow Scott Coker out of the water as far as that goes in that area. But I feel like that's such a small area of the fight game that it wouldn't be worth it, basically.
I think that Dana has sort of destroyed. He's weird, and I'm going to get into a lot of Dana stuff with like some of the revisionist MMA stuff I'm doing, because he has really changed a lot of fighters' legacies based on what he tried to convince the public of at the time. Tito Ortiz being one. So, my point is that I don't think anybody's willing to do what Dana's willing to do. He's willing to, be completely immersed in this life. And Chael has worked with World Series of Fighting. He's now worked with Bellator. He always kind of has his own thing going on. He's got Errol and the bad guy now. If he was like the vice president or president of Bellator and still did Errol and the bad guy, that'd be fantastic for Bellator, because he would sort of be under his breath slipping Bellator in there all the time. But go ahead.
Yeah, him as like vice president or a spokesperson or something for Bellator, that would be amazing. like just because we know how he can talk. You've seen him promote like for cards that he's on. I don't know if you watched the build up to Bellator NYC, but I mean, man, the guy basically sold the card on his own. Um, and you know, if that's the kind of guy you want promoting, but there's just so much else that goes on besides that. So having him in a position like vice president, spokesperson, or just make up some stupid title and have him be the guy that's in front of the cameras talking, you know, instead of Coker maybe, and then have Coker, you know, maybe come out and clear, more back end type, you know, stuff that the public frankly just doesn't care about, and more for us media guys than anyone.
Yeah.
um, and let Chael kind of be the hype man, I guess.
And honestly, when you look at a guy like Coker, I mean, the good news with him in Bellator is that you don't build Strikeforce in the way that he built Strikeforce without having an eye for talent. Because all the guys that he found were young. I mean, they were early in their careers,
Yeah,
and then they went on to have great careers. It
it's
wasn't like,
harder now.
but
Wait,
yeah, it is. But I think it's like because Dana's got his thing, and there's all these other ways that they're trying to grab up all the fighters. But I think that Coker didn't pick these guys and go, and they didn't just to say, you know what, I'm going to have a great career because Scott Coker had faith in me. No, he had an eye for talent and found Luke Rockhold, and then Luke Rockhold went on to be who he was probably meant to be. So I think that, yeah, but I think Coker's never going to be the guy who's, does what Dana does, all the scrums and all that stuff that that's really where the UFC was built in the old days, in those scrums, and Dana kind of giving you, getting in arguments with fighters and all this stuff. I mean, Dana was in it. He was immersed in it. He damn near fought Tito Ortiz. So they need someone who's got, not that Scott Coker's not committed, but they need someone that is willing, that has all those things.
I guess you would need to like merge Coker and Chael into one person. They don't have the technology for that yet, so it goes back to my thing of having him as like the vice president and kind of having this like two-headed monster of Coker and Chael. Because yeah, you're totally right. Dana White is able to do what Scott Coker does, and do what Chael does. Maybe he doesn't. I don't think he does either as good as those guys, and it's probably impossible to do both as well. Like I really think Dana's reputation for being a talent seeker is not as good as people think.
Right.
Just look at his track record on looking for a fighters.
Yeah.
Like those guys have all been kind of brutal. It's really his matchmakers, Sean Shelby, McMaynard, and of course recently retired. God, no, I'm gonna blank on his name, but the guy who was matchmaker forever. Before Sean Shelby and McMahon.
Joe Silva.
Yeah, him. Were the guys who are really picking out the talent. So,
and if you notice, they're involved in Tuesday Night Contender Series, whereas they're not involved looking for a fight. So yeah,
exactly. And Contender Series guys have been So you get what I'm saying. Like, there's no best solution really. You can't. I mean, there's no replacement. There's no other Dana White out there. He's his own. He's in a completely other world. But having Scott Coker and Chael together somehow as a cohesive unit would just be amazing.
Yeah, and like you said, I mean, it's a beat to shit cliche, but it's Dana White created a mold and then destroyed it when he was done with it. You know what I mean? He made himself something, and then there's no way to recreate it necessarily. No. All right, guys, there you have it. The sparring sessions. We talked about Bellator. Initially, we were talking about the Grand Prix and the matchups, but listen, Tony and I agree. We're not going to sit here and have fake tension between us if we agree on something. I'm with him. I think those matchups are legit. I think that Bellator would take a lot of them. So then that transitioned our discussion. We want good discussions, and it transitioned our discussion into what Bellator can do. So we want to hear from you guys. Talk about in the comments section what you think Bellator can do. Hit us up on Twitter, SoundCloud, where all these things will be available. Give us your thoughts. I mean, did we hit on some things there or not? All right, that does it for sparring sessions. We will see you next time.